The courtroom fell silent as the surveillance footage played on the screen. What it showed would haunt everyone who watched it. Margaret Eleanor Hayes, 78 years old, had served her community for over 5 decades. A retired schoolteacher who had educated 3 generations of children in Providence, Rhode Island, she was known simply as Miss Maggie, the woman who still baked cookies for the neighborhood kids, who organized charity drives for veterans, and who had never missed a Sunday service at St. Augustine's Church in 60 years. That Tuesday afternoon, Miss Maggie was walking home from the pharmacy, carrying her heart medication and a small bag of groceries. She moved slowly. Her hip had been bothering her lately, but she smiled at everyone she passed, as she always did. She never saw him coming. 23-year-old Derek Weston came speeding down Maple Avenue in his black Mercedes-AMG, music blasting, phone in hand. He ran the red light at the intersection without a second thought. When Miss Maggie stepped onto the crosswalk, with the walk signal clearly in her favor, Derek didn't brake. He swerved, lost control, and his side mirror struck the elderly woman with brutal force, sending her frail body spinning onto the pavement. Her groceries scattered across the street. Her medication rolled into the gutter. And Miss Maggie lay motionless, blood pooling beneath her silver hair. Derek stopped his car. For a moment, witnesses thought he would help. Instead, he stepped out, looked at the scene, and laughed. "Watch where you're going next time, Grandma," he shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then he took a photo of the scene, not to document the accident, but to post on social media with the caption, "Old people really need to stay home lol #NotMyFault #Slowpokes." 3 witnesses rushed to Miss Maggie's side while Derek casually got back in his car and drove away. He didn't call 911. He didn't check if she was alive. He simply left. Miss Maggie was rushed to Rhode Island Hospital with a fractured skull, 3 broken ribs, a shattered hip, and internal bleeding. For 6 days, she fought for her life in the ICU. The doctors weren't sure she would make it. She did. But she would never walk without assistance again. When the story broke, Providence exploded with fury. Derek's social media post had gone viral before he could delete it. Local news stations ran the story around the clock. National media picked it up within hours. The hashtag Justice for Miss Maggie trended for 3 consecutive days. Derek Weston's identity was exposed within hours. And with it came a revelation that made the public even more furious. Derek was the only son of Commander Richard Weston, the Chief of Police of Providence. Suddenly, people weren't just angry about the crime. They were certain that Derek would walk free. "Another rich kid protected by his powerful daddy," read the headlines. "Police chief's son above the law?" asked the pundits. Protesters gathered outside the police station, demanding accountability. Some demanded that Commander Weston resign. The case was assigned to Judge Frank Caprio, the legendary veteran judge known throughout Rhode Island for his wisdom, compassion, and unwavering commitment to justice. At 83 years old, he had seen it all, and yet even he felt the weight of this case. Everyone was watching. Everyone expected the worst. But a revelation was about to unfold in that courtroom that no one, not the media, not the public, not even Derek himself, could have predicted. The morning of April 14th arrived with a cold rain that seemed to reflect the mood of the city. By 7:30 a.m., a line had formed outside the Providence Municipal Courthouse that stretched around the block. By 9 a.m., when the doors opened, every seat in Courtroom A was filled. Those who couldn't get in gathered outside with signs and candles. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Journalists from every major network occupied the press section. Miss Maggie's former students, now adults with children of their own, sat in quiet solidarity, some wearing pins with her photograph. Local community leaders, veterans she had helped, parents whose children she had taught, they had all come to bear witness. At precisely 9:30 a.m., Judge Frank Caprio entered the courtroom. His robe seemed to carry the weight of his 40 years on the bench. His white hair was neatly combed, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. He moved with the deliberate grace of a man who understood that every gesture in this room carried meaning. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Everyone stood. Everyone except Derek Weston, who remained seated until his attorney physically pulled him to his feet. Judge Caprio noticed. He said nothing. Not yet. As the courtroom settled, the judge reviewed his documents in silence. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional flash of a camera. Then he looked up, his gaze settling on the defendant. Derek Weston stood at the defense table in a designer suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His hair was perfectly styled. His posture radiated entitlement. He didn't look like a man facing serious criminal charges. He looked like a man who was annoyed to be there. "Mr. Weston," Judge Caprio began, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room, "you are charged with reckless endangerment, hit and run causing serious bodily injury, failure to render aid, and assault with a deadly weapon, your vehicle. Do you understand these charges?" Derek's attorney stood quickly. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty. We believe this was a simple traffic accident that has been blown out of proportion by media sensationalism." Mrs. Hayes stepped into traffic without. "I asked your client, Counselor," Judge Caprio interrupted, his eyes never leaving Derek. "Mr. Weston, do you understand the charges against you?" Derek shrugged. Actually shrugged. "Yeah, I understand them," he said, his voice dripping with boredom. "I just don't think they're fair. It was her fault. She walked right in front of my car. What was I supposed to do?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Caprio raised his hand, and silence returned. "And after you struck Mrs. Hayes," the judge continued, "you posted a photograph of her lying injured on the ground to social media with a mocking caption. Is that correct?" Derek rolled his eyes. "It was a joke. People are so sensitive these days. She's fine anyway, isn't she? Old people fall all the time." The murmur became a rumble. Someone in the gallery shouted, "Shame," before being silenced by the bailiff. Judge Caprio's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He turned to the prosecution. "Please call your first witness." The prosecutor stood. "The people call Margaret Eleanor Hayes." The courtroom doors opened, and Miss Maggie entered. She was in a wheelchair, pushed by a young woman who had once been her student. Her left arm was in a cast. A bandage still covered part of her forehead. She was smaller than she'd been before, diminished somehow, and yet, as she was wheeled to the witness stand, she held her head high. Derek looked at her and smiled. Not a smile of remorse or sympathy. A smile of amusement. Miss Maggie was sworn in and helped into a special chair beside the witness stand. The prosecutor approached gently. "Mrs. Hayes, can you tell us what you remember about the afternoon of March 15th? She spoke slowly, her voice thin but clear. "I was walking home from the pharmacy. I had just picked up my heart medication. The walk signal was on. I checked. I always check. My late husband Walter always told me to be careful at intersections." She paused, gathering herself. "I was in the middle of the crosswalk when I heard the car. It was going so fast. I tried to move, but my hip... I'm not as quick as I used to be. What happened next? I felt something hit my shoulder and my head. Then I was on the ground. I couldn't move. I couldn't feel my legs." Her voice trembled. "I thought I was going to die there, on that street, alone." "Were you alone?" "At first, yes. The young man who hit me, he got out of his car. I thought he was coming to help me. I looked up at him and I said, 'Please call an ambulance.' Do you know what he said?" "What did he say, Mrs. Hayes?" "He laughed. He laughed at me lying there bleeding, and he said, 'Watch where you're going next time, Grandma.' Then he took a picture of me." A tear rolled down her cheek. I taught children for 52 years. I taught them kindness, respect, responsibility. I never imagined anyone could be so cruel. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Several jurors wiped their eyes. Miss Maggie looked directly at Derek. "I don't hate you, young man," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I feel sorry for you. Because somewhere along the way, someone failed to teach you that every human being has dignity. Every life has value. Even old lives. Even slow lives. Even lives that inconvenience you on your way somewhere important." Derek's smirk faltered. For just a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual mask of indifference. "Whatever," he muttered. Judge Caprio heard it. His fingers tightened around his gavel. "Mr. Weston," the judge said, his voice dropping to a tone that those who knew him recognized as dangerous, "you will remain silent unless addressed. You will show respect in this courtroom. And you will show respect to this woman who you injured and abandoned. She's just—" Derek began. "I said silent." The word rang off the walls. Derek's attorney grabbed his arm, whispering urgently. For the first time, Derek looked uncertain. The prosecution continued, presenting evidence. The traffic camera footage, the witness statements, Derek's social media post, the medical records detailing Miss Maggie's injuries and her long road to recovery. Each piece of evidence was damning. Each piece made Derek's indifference harder to justify. As the morning session drew to a close, Judge Caprio called for a brief recess. The gallery buzzed with conversation. Reporters typed furiously on their laptops. Miss Maggie was wheeled out to rest. And then, as people began to rise from their seats, movement at the back of the courtroom caught the bailiff's attention. A tall man in civilian clothes stood up slowly in the last row. He had been sitting there quietly all morning, face hidden beneath a baseball cap. Now he removed the cap, revealing a face that every officer in Providence would recognize. Commander Richard Weston, Chief of Police. Derek's father. He had been there the entire time. Watching. Listening. And the look on his face was not one of a father preparing to defend his son. It was the look of a man who had made a decision. And then he began walking toward the front of the courtroom. The murmur that swept through the courtroom was like the sound of an approaching storm. People who recognized Commander Weston began whispering to those who didn't. Within seconds, every phone in the press section was raised, recording the moment. Derek turned at the commotion. When he saw his father walking down the center aisle, his arrogant mask cracked completely. For the first time, he looked like what he truly was, a frightened boy. "Dad." His voice came out small, uncertain. "Dad, what are you doing here? I told you I could handle this. Your lawyer said." Commander Richard Weston didn't look at his son. His eyes were fixed on Judge Caprio. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years in law enforcement and something heavier, the weight of a father's shame. "I request permission to address the court." The defense attorney was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense has not been informed." "This isn't about the defense, Counselor," Commander Weston interrupted, still not looking at the attorney or his son. "This is about justice. And it's about the truth." Judge Caprio studied the man before him. They had known each other for 2 decades. They had worked together, respected each other, sometimes disagreed but always with mutual esteem. The judge saw something in Richard Weston's eyes that he had never seen before: brokenness. "I'll allow it," Judge Caprio said quietly. "Approach the bench, Commander." Richard Weston walked forward until he stood directly in front of the judge's elevated platform. Then, without being asked, he turned to face the courtroom, to face the cameras, the community, and his son. "My name is Richard Allen Weston," he began, his voice steady but heavy. "I am the Chief of Police of Providence, Rhode Island. I have served this community for 31 years. I have dedicated my life to the law, to justice, to protecting the innocent." He paused, swallowing hard. "And I have failed." The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. "Not as a police officer. As a father." Richard finally looked at Derek. The young man's face had gone pale. "When Derek was born, I held him in my arms and I made him a promise. I promised to protect him. I promised to give him everything I never had. I grew up poor, Your Honor. We had nothing. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through school, through the academy. I told myself that my son would never struggle the way I did." He shook his head slowly. "So I gave him everything. The best schools, the best clothes, the best cars. I gave him things. But I didn't give him what mattered. I didn't give him values. I didn't give him consequences. Every time he made a mistake, I fixed it. Every time he got in trouble, I made it disappear. I thought I was protecting him." His voice cracked. "I was destroying him." Derek's eyes were filling with tears now. "Dad, stop. Please stop." But Richard continued as if he hadn't heard. "When I saw that video, the video of my son laughing at an injured elderly woman, a woman he had struck and abandoned, I felt something I had never felt before." He looked at Miss Maggie, who had been wheeled back into the courtroom. "I felt shame so deep I couldn't breathe. That woman could have been my mother. She could have been anyone's mother. And my son, the boy I raised, the boy I thought I knew, he laughed at her suffering and walked away." Richard turned back to Judge Caprio. "Your Honor, I know what people expected when they saw me here. They expected me to use my position to protect my son. They expected me to call in favors, to pull strings, to make this go away like I've made everything else go away." He stood straighter, squaring his shoulders. "I am not here to protect my son. I am here to ask you, to beg you, to do what I should have done years ago." The courtroom held its collective breath. "Hold him accountable." Derek's legs buckled. He grabbed the defense table to keep from falling. "Dad, no. No, you can't. Derek." Richard's voice was firm but filled with a different kind of love than his son had ever heard. "I love you. I have loved you since the moment you were born, and I will love you until the day I die. But love isn't protecting someone from the consequences of their actions. Love is wanting someone to become the person they're capable of being." He walked slowly toward his son, stopping just a few feet away. "When you were little, you used to ask me about my job. You wanted to know why I became a police officer. Do you remember what I told you?" Derek was crying openly now, tears streaming down his face. The arrogance was gone. The mask was shattered. All that remained was a lost young man who had never learned how to be good. You said you wanted to help people," Derek whispered. "That's right. I wanted to help people. I wanted to protect the innocent and hold the guilty accountable. I believed in justice." Richard's voice broke. "But I forgot to teach you what justice means. I forgot to show you that consequences aren't punishments, they're lessons. They're how we grow. They're how we become better." He reached out and put his hand on Derek's shoulder. "I should have let you face consequences when you were 12 and you vandalized that store. I should have let you face consequences when you were 16 and you got in that fight at school. I should have let you face consequences every single time, instead of making calls and writing checks and making problems disappear." Richard turned back to Judge Caprio. "Your Honor, I stand before you not as the Chief of Police, but as a father who finally understands what his job should have been all along. I ask you to apply the full weight of the law to my son's actions. Not because I want him to suffer, but because I want him to have the chance to change, to become the man I know he can be. He looked at Miss Maggie. Ma'am, I know there are no words that can undo what happened to you. But I want you to know that I am sorry. As a father, as a police officer, as a human being, I am profoundly sorry for what my son did to you. And I give you my word, there will be no special treatment. There will be no phone calls. There will be no protection. He straightened his back and addressed the entire courtroom. Justice will be served, even if it breaks my heart. Derek collapsed into his chair, sobbing. The defense attorney sat motionless, clearly unsure how to proceed. The gallery was filled with people wiping their eyes, even some of the journalists. Judge Caprio was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than it had been all day. Commander Weston, in 40 years on this bench, I have seen many things. I have seen parents lie for their children. I have seen them threaten, bribe, and manipulate. I have seen them destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses. He paused. I have never, not once, seen a parent do what you just did. He looked at Derek, who couldn't meet his eyes. Mr. Weston, I want you to look at your father. Look at him. Slowly, Derek raised his head. That man just sacrificed his reputation, his career, and possibly his relationship with you, because he loves you enough to tell you the truth. That is real love, son. That is what a father's love is supposed to look like. The judge took a deep breath. We will recess until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., at which time I will deliver my ruling. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell like thunder. And in that sound, Derek Weston heard the end of one life and the terrifying possibility of another. The following morning, the courtroom was even more packed than before. Word of Commander Weston's speech had spread across the nation overnight. Every major news network was now covering the story. The hashtag #AFathersChoice was trending alongside hashtag Justice for Miss Maggie. But inside courtroom A, none of that seemed to matter. The atmosphere was different. Quieter. More solemn. Something had shifted in the collective consciousness of everyone present. Derek Weston entered the courtroom a changed man, at least on the surface. The designer suit was gone, replaced by simple, respectful clothing. His hair was uncombed. His eyes were red and swollen. He had clearly not slept. His father was already seated in the front row, directly behind the defense table. Close enough for Derek to feel his presence. Close enough for everyone to see that Richard Weston was not hiding. Miss Maggie was wheeled in, surrounded by her former students and community supporters. She looked tired but peaceful. Judge Frank Caprio entered, and everyone rose. The weight of the moment was palpable. "Please be seated," the judge said. He arranged his papers slowly, deliberately. Then he removed his glasses, cleaned them with a cloth, and put them back on. "I have been a judge for 40 years, he began, his voice filling the silent room. "In that time, I have learned that the law is not simply a list of rules and punishments. The law is a mirror. It reflects who we are as a society, what we value, what we will tolerate, and what we refuse to accept." He looked at Derek. "Mr. Weston, you committed a serious crime. You struck an elderly woman with your vehicle because you were distracted and reckless. You left her bleeding on the street. You photographed her suffering and shared it for laughs. These actions reveal a profound disconnection from basic human decency." Derek's head dropped. But this court is not merely about punishment. It is about justice, and true justice includes the possibility of redemption. He picked up a document. "Derek Allen Weston, I hereby sentence you to the following: 5 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years based on behavior and demonstrated rehabilitation." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Derek's body shook. "Additionally," the judge continued, Upon release, you will serve 1,000 hours of community service at elderly care facilities and hospitals. You will complete an intensive rehabilitation program focused on empathy and accountability. You will pay full restitution for all medical expenses incurred by Mrs. Hayes, present and future. The judge paused. And finally, a provision that is unusual but that I believe is essential to your rehabilitation. You will write a personal letter of apology to Mrs. Hayes every month during your incarceration. Not a form letter. Not a legal document. A genuine reflection on what you did and who you are becoming. He set down the document. This sentence is designed not to destroy you, Mr. Weston, but to give you the opportunity to rebuild yourself into someone worthy of the second chance you may receive. Whether you take that opportunity is entirely up to you. Before the bailiff could move toward Derek, Commander Weston stood up. Your Honor, if I may, I would like to add something. Judge Caprio nodded. Richard walked around the barrier and stood beside his son. Derek, whatever sentence the state gives you, I want you to know, I'm not abandoning you. I will visit you every week. I will be there when you get out. I will help you rebuild your life. He paused. But there will be changes. He took a deep breath. The Mercedes is sold. The money goes to Mrs. Hayes. The trust fund your grandfather left you. You won't see it until you're 35, and only if you've demonstrated 5 consecutive years of responsible living. The apartment I bought you is gone. When you're released, you'll live with me. You'll work. Real work. You'll earn your own way. Derek looked up at his father, tears streaming down his face. You're going to learn what I should have taught you years ago, that your value as a human being doesn't come from what you have. It comes from who you are and how you treat others. Richard put his hand on Derek's shoulder. This is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, son. But I believe in you. I believe the good person I saw glimpses of when you were young is still in there somewhere. And I'm going to be here, every step of the way, as you find him. Derek broke down completely, collapsing into his father's arms. For a long moment, they stood there, a father and son, broken open, beginning the long journey of healing. Then another voice cut through the emotional silence. Your Honor, may I speak? It was Miss Maggie. Judge Caprio gestured for her to continue. She was wheeled to the center of the courtroom, directly facing Derek. The young man who had left her bleeding on the street looked at her with eyes full of shame and fear. Young man, Miss Maggie said, her voice clear despite her frailty. Look at me. Derek met her eyes. I have had many weeks to think about you. At first, I felt only anger and hurt. But then I remembered something I taught my students for 52 years. Every person is a story still being written. She reached out her uninjured hand toward him. You wrote an ugly chapter that day on Maple Avenue. You wrote cruelty and selfishness and indifference. But that doesn't have to be your whole story. Derek was shaking. I'm a woman of faith, and my faith teaches me that forgiveness is not about saying what someone did was okay. It's about releasing the poison of anger so we can both be free. She paused. So I want you to know, I forgive you. The courtroom erupted in emotional murmurs. Not because you deserve it, you haven't earned it yet, but because I choose to believe that the young man who goes into that prison today can come out as someone different. Someone who understands that every life has value. Someone who will never, ever walk away from a person in need. She withdrew her hand. Don't waste this chance. Honor your father's courage. Honor your own potential. And maybe someday, honor me, by becoming someone who helps instead of hurts. Derek fell to his knees before her wheelchair. I'm sorry, he sobbed. I'm so sorry. I was so wrong. About everything. I didn't see you as a person. I didn't see anyone as a person. I'm so sorry. Miss Maggie gently touched the top of his head. Then let this be the day you start seeing clearly. Epilogue. 18 months later. The community garden in South Providence was thriving. Tomatoes, peppers, and squash grew in neat rows. Flowers bordered the walkways. A new bench sat beneath an oak tree, with a small plaque that read, "In honor of those who teach us to grow, donated by Derek Weston." Derek himself was there, on his knees in the dirt, helping an elderly man plant seedlings. His prison-issued clothes had been replaced by simple jeans and a work shirt. His face had changed. There was a stillness to it now, a thoughtfulness that hadn't been there before. He had been released after 18 months for good behavior and exceptional participation in the rehabilitation program. His letters to Miss Maggie had become something the program counselors used as an example for other inmates. Genuine, reflective, evolving documents that showed a young man slowly discovering his own humanity. Now, he volunteered at the garden 3 days a week. The other 2 days, he worked at the Veterans Center downtown, helping organize supply drives and accompanying elderly veterans to medical appointments. His father visited him often. Their relationship had been rebuilt from the ground up, based not on money or status, but on honesty, accountability, and genuine connection. They had dinner together every Sunday. And Miss Maggie? She had become something unexpected, a mentor. Once a month, Derek would visit her at her home. They would sit on her porch, drinking tea, and she would tell him stories about her students, the ones who had struggled, the ones who had fallen, and the ones who had risen again. "Everyone deserves a second chapter," she told him one afternoon, as the sun set over Providence. "The question is, what will you write in yours?" Derek looked out at the city where he had once acted as if he owned the world, and where he now understood he was just a small part of something larger. "Something worth reading, Miss Maggie," he said quietly. "Something worth reading."